Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by, and welcome to the Arch Smart conference call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Please be advised that today's conference is being recorded. If you require any further assistance, please press star zero. I would now like to hand the conference over to your speaker today, Mark Lang. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Yolanda. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're excited to have you and excited to be able to talk about this subject for the next half hour or so. We've all been thrown into, both personally and professionally, a different world over the last couple of weeks, and we're going to use today to give us all some tips that we can use to deal with it effectively. We're pleased to be joined by Dean Minuto, somebody that I've known and worked with for over 20 years and has been helping Arch out for the last several years. Dean's a expert in brain science and behavioral science and is going to give us some great tips based on his vast level of knowledge. So, Dean, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, brother. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We got a couple of hard truths to recognize before we jump into the tips, and we're going to cover tips for working at home. We're going to cover tips for how we interact with each other from the world of brain science. But before we get there, I just want to acknowledge the two hard truths that we have to reconcile ourselves with. The first is that patterns have been totally disrupted for everyone you know. That means everyone's brain has been thrown into fight or flight. And the good news is, from the world of brain science, we now know more about the brain than we've ever known before. And we actually have tools that we can share with you to help you in your interactions with others. The second hard truth is that if you're now working at home, you're always at work. So we also have some brain science there to discover. So bottom line up front, and to help you guys apply, I'm going to go through 5 specific recommendations and tips about working at home. I'm also going to link them back to the brain science, and then I'm going to share with the group 5 tips in terms of how we interact with each other. Many of these tips not only come from brain science and sales and marketing best practices, but from some folks I know who spent their career in the military, from a brigadier general who ran U.S. Cyber Command to my friend who ran the Top Gun program for the Air Force. That's where the basis of these 5 suggestions are coming from. So again, two slides I'm going to start with, Mark. And when I say again, this is because you and I have run this webinar. I think this is 6 or 7 times, not including our practice sessions. And the brain likes that, what Mark and I have done, because the brain is predictable. Our brains are predictable. We know how our brains are going to respond to certain stimuli. More importantly, the brain likes predictable. So because we know what's going to happen with these calls, how it's going to be set up with Sir Christopher James, who I have acknowledged is one of the first legends to come forward during this time. That's Sir Christopher, the most competent, to Lady Yolanda, who is the most prepared, who we just had on the phone. We now know the process we need to go through to set up these webinars. So, Mark, I'd like to jump into, well, I think the background on the brain science. Are you okay with me?
Yep.
Jumping in there, thoughts?
Let's jump.
Anything you'd like to add before? Let's jump.
Let's jump.
All right. So brain is predictable. What that means is there's only 2 things you need to keep in mind that brain scientists now tell us are the 2 goals that everyone's brain on the planet has during any day. First goal is survival, and then specifically themselves and their kids. The second thing that we focus on right now, the brain's second goal, is saving energy. So, just to think about this a little differently, goal number 1 is to keep you alive. Goal number 2 is to use as little energy as possible in achieving goal number 1. So the brain is constantly looking for shortcuts, and there's 2 different parts of the brain that look for shortcuts. One part of the brain, and I'm going to talk about that second, is the part of the brain that actually makes decisions that has to do with keeping you alive. Okay, and there's 3 triggers that part of the brain uses. The part of the brain that I'm going to start talking about is the part of the brain that makes decisions. Now, the challenge is this top part of the brain, the neocortex, can be overwhelmed with the fight or flight function, and when that happens, we don't make good decisions. The folks that you're interacting with, some of them are going into fight or flight hundreds of times during the day. And they're liable to be overreacting, making mistakes, etc., because they're not using the thinking part of your brain. So up top, this neocortex, this is the part of the brain that thinks and uses what scientists call cognitive biases as shortcuts. But we have to think to use these. There's 188 of them. I summarize them in the courses that Mark and I have worked on together over the last 20 years in different companies Mark's been associated with. I refer to them as the magnets. Motion, ask, give, nice, evidence, trust, and supply are the 7 primary shortcuts that the thinking part of your brain uses. So you guys will know motion, a thing in motion stays in motion. From a brain science perspective, that's the commitment and consistency principle. People like to be consistent with commitments they make. But Mark, if you were to pick any other card for us to focus on for this call, which card would you like me to share with the group?
I would go with the nice card.
We're going to go with the middle card, and that's always the one that you start with because you know the importance of people liking you. I mean, and anyone who interacts with Mark is going to like him. And there's 3 shortcuts the brain uses to decide whether we're going to like someone. And the second 2 that I'm going to cover, I call these the 3 C's. The second 2 are vitally important for you all to be keeping in mind today with what's going on in the world. Remember, the brain is constantly scanning the environment for any evidence of anything that might put you at risk. We like to be around people we like. And the leading negotiation expert in America is at Wharton. I've worked with him several times, interacted, gone through his courses. He will tell you that people are more likely to give concessions, to say yes to people they like than people they don't like. We like people we have something in common with. That's the first C. So Mark and I have children about the same age. We know that there's shortcuts to finding things in common with each other. The second C is even more powerful, guys, in today's world. Pay a compliment. Now, while I know this may seem like a little thing, the little things are the big things again. The little things, the things that have always been essential that we've taken for granted are now the big things, and everything going on out there is personal. Here's something that Mark knows that I've been doing with folks for about the last 2 years, a little kind of behavioral psychology test. And about 30% of the people I've been giving this test to pass. And it went like this. If I walk on an airplane and there's a flight attendant, if I walk into a restaurant and I'm dealing with it, I call them by their first name. I would say it like this: Mark, my name's Dino. I just want to thank you for working today. And they only have 2 reactions, Mark. You know, and I've shared it with you. You know, it's like spraying water in a puppy dog's face. They shake their head, and 30% responded appropriately. No, thank you. No, I appreciate you. Thank you. That was very nice. Thank you for that little kindness. 70%, folks, over the last 2 years, when business was good, when everyone was working, thank you for working today, Mark. And he would look at me and go, it's not like I had a choice. Now, I will tell you, that same person is going to recognize now how different the world is. And 4 days ago, during this crisis, I was at my local grocery store here in St. Pete Beach in Florida. And as I said to Francine, the bagger, Francine, I'm Dino. Thank you for working today. She had a pepper in one hand. She had a tomato in the other. And she looked at me, guys, and her eyes filled with tears. And she said, no one has ever thanked me for working. I'm 2 feet from the public. Doctors and nurses at least have gloves and masks. Folks, when you pay someone a compliment, when you thank them, there's something that actually goes off in the brain. The brain actually releases dopamine. Dopamine is a feel-good chemical. And I want you to remember that small acts of kindness during this time are not small. The third C, Mark, under NICE, is collaborate. And you and I have talked about how one of my great mentors, Dr. Robert Cialdini, retired a few years ago. And in his retirement, he said, in today's world, and this was before the coronavirus, what people need to know is this: you got their back. You're in this together. And Mark, you'll recognize the photo I'm showing here because, well, take us back. This was what, 4 or 5 weeks ago?
Yep, exactly.
You had asked that I work with one of your great subsidiaries, really great people who I love, up in Cortland, New York. And Cortland, New York, folks, I live in Florida. Cortland, New York's a 3-hour flight away. But two things happened the week before. The Pentagon identified 11 sequestration facilities around the 11 largest international airports in the U.S. And the head of epidemiology at Harvard had said he projected between 60 and 80% of Americans were going to have this virus. And because I connect my behaviors with my values, just like Arch does, and one of my values is to only contribute and treat my clients as if they're people I love, I told Mark, I am not going to put myself through international airports and expose your team in Cortland to what I might pick up. So the reason my car is so filthy is I put 2,885 miles on the car that week. It took 3 days to get there. It took 3 days to get back to deliver a 6-hour workshop. So I'm going to encourage you guys, how are you showing people during this time that you got their back? All right, so those are some of the shortcuts, and there's actually 7 of them. We covered a little bit of one of them. We could go into more detail, Mark, if you and the team wanted on another call, but down on the bottom of your brain, the part that I have highlighted here is the part of your brain that makes decisions. Guys, there's actually a button you can push in your brain and in others' brains to make decisions. It's called the limbic system, and the limbic system is the fight or flight organ. Fight or flight is a decision. Mark, my hands are balled up right now. I'm going to fight you. I'm going to take you on. Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm running away. I'm going to fly. That's decisions. If my hands get balled up or if I start running away, it means it's on. No more thinking. This is the part of the brain that is the on button for decisions. And the problem is that this part of the brain is triggered by 3 things. And I'll zoom in here, but 3 triggers to the deciding part of your brain. Alpha, I refer to alpha, the first trigger. Primary, most important, alpha. What's in it for me? Everyone that you're interacting with now, folks, is listening to that radio station, WIIFM. Whether they're in Australia, whether they're in Bermuda, whether they're in San Francisco, everyone is focusing on themselves. Remember that. Number 2, everyone pays attention to change, the Greek word delta. Delta, though, means danger to the brain. Any change in the environment is probably a saber-toothed tiger. Right, Mark?
Exactly.
I mean, we are going to die. We're going to die if there's no audio on this call. We're going to die if – no, guess what, guys? We're not going to die. But our brain, when we are triggered by delta and difference, thinks we might. So we have to find a way to get on top of this, and I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment. So alpha, us, our survivor. Delta, change means danger. It's actually video, the next line. Video meaning the Latin verb, video, to see and to understand. The last trigger marked to the deciding part of the brain is this. Visual stimuli is processed 30 times faster than any other stimuli. So I have a picture of an eyeball there. Never say it if you can show it. So 2 goals, survival and save energy. We know that that is the part of the brain that gets triggered to make decisions. So that's the overview on the brain science, Mark. Where would you like to go next? Or you let me know.
Well, I think, you talked about change in Delta. One of the big changes for all of us, or virtually all of us, is that we're now working from home. And that's a big change. So if you could give us some tips around how we do that using the brain science, that would be really helpful.
So I'm going to do that, and I have that up here on the board, but the first thing I want to do is tell you guys how to shut off anxiety in your brain in less than 8 seconds. I'm going to do this very quickly. The model was invented by a dear friend of mine, Dr. Bill Crawford. Dr. Bill Crawford has 3 PBS specials. Dr. Bill Crawford has written 7 books. Dr. Bill Crawford has had Skype calls with my daughter to teach her this model. Because Devin, you know Birdie, and you've met Birdie several times over the years, Mark, but Birdie suffers from a terrible anxiety. And Dr. Bill Crawford has put together a 5-step model, and it's around the word brain. You see it here, BRAIN, that we can use to turn off that limbic system. So remember that limbic system, that fight or flight, it's on autopilot. It thinks that there's saber-toothed tigers here. There's not, okay? So we can take back control by taking over something that limbic system usually does on its own, which is breathing. but it's a very specific kind of breath. If you guys feel yourself, well, before I do this, Mark, I got to ask the group, if I'm going to share this with you guys, you got to promise me you're going to teach it to 2 people in the next 24 hours, because that's how you will remember it if you start teaching it. So brain, write that word down, folks, and I'll give you each letter of the acronym. B for brain stands for breathe, but specifically 4 count in, hold it for 4 counts, 4 count out. You've now sent your limbic system a message, and it's now paying attention. So the R, you're going to tell it what to do. The next breath you take, you're going to say the word relax. You're now giving your brain something to focus on. The brain will go wherever you focus. Once you have breathed and said the word relax, with your next breath, I want you to ask yourself this question: what do I want to be feeling right now? Confident, happy, alive, I don't know, whatever it is in that moment. On a date, it might be something different. Interacting with your kids, it might be something different. But ask yourself, what do I want to be feeling? And the next step, the I, stands for imagine a time when you felt that way. Right now, I imagine one of the first times Mark and I met in the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania. And I'm thinking about him and his associate Greg, and I'm thinking about where we are. Now I'm back. This is the last step. Now I've changed my chemicals. I've gone from being stressed out to having that feeling of camaraderie and friendship and having met a friend. And these slides will provide to everyone. All right, Mark, into the 5 tips for working at home. Number 1 tip, remember the number 2 hard truth I gave you guys. If you are now working at home, you are now always at work. So, first tip, from my experience, 32 years of working at home. If you have a door to your workspace, close it when you are done with your work. Close it. Block it off. Because if you can see your work, remember what I said about visual processing. The brain spends 90% of its power during the day processing visuals. If you see your work, your brain will go to work doing work. And there will be no end to your workday, folks. Now, if you don't have a door you can close, I want you to physically take your work and put it out of your vision. Last week, and I told you this story, Mark, Dad was here visiting. Mm-hmm. Dad was 32 years with IBM. But if you can imagine Tony Soprano in a blue suit, a handsome Tony Soprano, but you got it. So Dad walks into my house at what he believes is the end of my workday and calls out, because again, this is an IBM executive who's never worked at home. He calls out, "Son, did you get all your work done today?" And I laughed. There is no day, Dad, when I can get all my work done. But I'm done with what I'm going to do today. And I shut the door to my office and left. Folks, we're in a time where your work will bleed into everything, and you have to not let it do that. I got friends, and Mark knows this. I got friends who have been calling me throughout the day today who are having to let go all of their employees and need my help. And because of that, it's crowding into other stuff. It's making me miss an appointment here or miss an appointment. But here's the point. I can't be good for anyone if I don't keep myself healthy. So we're going to go down more on how we do that. Step number 2, the way you're going to keep yourself healthy when you're working at home is you're going to strategically set up some blank notepads around your house. So if you're in an area where you're working, where you're with your kids, and you think of something that has to do with business, you're going to get it out of your head on the notepad so that you're not thinking about it anymore. And at the end of that time period, you'll grab the notepad, take it into your office where you'll have it. Oh, Mark, I gave you the tip of putting one next to your bed. Because on Sunday night, what happened with you?
I had a nightmare that your audio wouldn't work on these calls.
Yeah. Well, get that out of your head. Let's figure out, as Nicholas said, let's focus on the process and figure out how we can make sure that doesn't happen. But we're not going to worry about that at midnight on a Sunday, or knowing it was 2 a.m. on a Sunday. We're going to put that in the notepad. Okay. 3rd tip, having a mirror in your workspace. And here's why. You transfer emotions even with your voice. And, prior to us working together, Mark, I spent 10 years working as what's referred to as a TO in the call center. Well, you guys call it call centers. The rest of the world calls it boiler room. So Los Angeles, had a boiler room sales operation, 50 sales reps. None of them were allowed to close a sale. When they got the customer to the point where a sale was to be made, they were to snap their fingers and call over the TO. That was me. I would take over the call, and as I did that, they all had a mirror, which I had put on top of all of their computers, because I would smile in that mirror and listen to what just happened to the tone and tenor of my voice. You guys can hear that I'm smiling, and so can people over the phone when you guys are talking to them. So put a mirror up in your office. Fourth, most important on this bullet point list, schedule time for you during the day. I'm talking about make an appointment in your calendar for you time. If it's important that you get an appointment, and you guys are important, you got to keep yourself healthy. You know, Mark got a text from me at 10:30 on Monday. What did the text say, Mark?
Says I'm going for a walk. I'll be out of pocket for 2 hours.
Yeah. I've been delivering these webinars nonstop, folks, but if I don't keep myself healthy, I'm not going to be able to do it. So schedule time for yourself. Now, the fifth one is more of a process that I want to teach you guys, because you can come out of, whether this is a month, folks, whether it's 18 months, okay, who cares? You can come out of this stronger and better than you came into it. And Mark, you've seen the before and after memes, the jokes online where it says day 1 of sequester and the guy looks like Brad Pitt from Legends of the Fall. And then it says day 30 of the sequester and the guy looks like John Candy from Uncle Buck, right? Well, guess what? That's not gonna be what happens to us, because we are going to start identifying the things we need to do to come out of this healthier than we came in. And there's a process you can follow. It's to set up physical cues in your environment and develop routines around them. Remember, the brain is constantly scanning the environment, looking for cues, looking to trigger your brain and for you to make shortcuts, especially for you to develop patterns. So a physical cue is what we refer to as a stimulus, but a cue is something we design. And if you respond repeatedly, you have now developed a routine or a habit. So the way to develop habits is to focus on the cues and our routines, and you're going to create a space in your work area and your home to do that. So here's an example, and Mark, this was a picture I took this morning for this presentation. That is a marble top that I have to walk by during the day. I want to be drinking 8-ounce glasses of water, because dehydration is one of the worst things that can happen for your brain during stressful periods. So the cue is a full glass of water and stones that have a word on them. I'm holding one that I just grabbed, Mark, before this call. It says hope. I'm holding the hope stone. I pick up that glass, folks. I drink it. I hold that stone, and I think about this word, hope. Then I go fill that glass up, and I put it back. If there is a full glass there, and there aren't 8 stones all the way over on the right, I know I haven't yet had my 8 glasses of water. So my routine, I have a little reward here with what I look like. You guys need to create these kinds of spaces during this month and the coming months for success to happen. All right, Mark, we got about 7 minutes left, which is enough time for me to go through the 5 tips that apply to business interactions. So with your permission, do you think we're ready for that, or did you want me to expand on anything?
I think we're ready for that, and I would just preview for everybody that this also works for personal interactions too, not just business.
Thank you. Anything I left out on the last couple, Mark, that you think is important for us to make sure we get?
No.
On the recording? No? Okay, great. 5 tips in terms of human interactions. Now, again, brain science tells us that the brain's first goal is survival. No one understands that more than the military, who are at risk all the time. And here's what I know about fighter pilots, having some of them as friends. They are the most risk averse, the least risky people you're ever going to meet. They want to be in control of everything. They know that risk is, in terms of how the brain processes, is 3 times as powerful as reward. So here's my first tip for you folks. It's a little exercise. 3 questions. This comes from my video training and from my course. And again, we'll make these slides available. 3 questions when you're dealing with anyone now. Number 1, what do you know about them? What's going on in their world? Number 2, do they see you as safe or risky? And number 3, how can you eliminate their risk? So the first tip is to remember to focus on risk and eliminating for people. The second tip has to do with what happens with the brain. The brain triggers at the beginning and end of every event. The military understands this. So when they communicate with each other, they have a term they use, bluff. It means bottom line up front. When you send an email, in the military, when you send an email, the subject line gives you the bottom line. Don't hide it in the middle. You want to save people energy, especially if they're in moments where they might be at risk. You want there to be low friction, what scientists call cognitive costs. You reduce their costs by telling them the important things at the beginning and end of any event. You guys, you got natural beginnings and ends. You got Monday morning, you got Friday afternoon. You got the beginning of a webinar, you got the end of a webinar. You have moments of power. Make sure you're using them wisely. Okay, third shortcut, and it is a shortcut. You're the military. Hoo-ah! What does that mean when an order is a hoo-ah, Sergeant? Well, what it means is, I heard you, I understand what you want, and I'm acknowledging what I'm going to do next. That's a shortcut, folks. Can you give your folks that you interact with the same message? I heard you, I understand you, and acknowledging that you got it. Remember, the brain is constantly scanning the environment, looking for cues and shortcuts. To the degree to which you can help people have shortcuts, hoo-ah is a shortcut. Okay, number 4 tip. And this goes back to something that Nicholas said that so resonated with me, Mark, and you guys included it in Arch's program, your behavioral program, Connecting to Arch's Values. And you know the quote I'm talking about. Can you share Nicholas's quote and how that kind of influenced where you went with the program?
Yeah, when he talks about, when things don't go our way, focus in on the process, not blaming the people.
So in the military, and this is the 4th tip, they have a process for doing. They call it an after-action review. I say WWDD, an after-action review. Every flight, every military exercise, there's 2 questions. What went well? And what are we going to do different? They're not looking at a person. They're looking at the process, right? And by the way, the brain science here is clear. Start by focusing on your did wells. Everyone's initial reaction is to focus on what they did wrong. You know, Sir Christopher, the most competent, may recall that when we did a brief review of the very first role play you and I did, Mark, when we got on the phone, one of the technology folks said, well, that was a train crash. No. No judgment. What went well, and what are we going to do different? Because we're going to role play it again in 5 minutes, right? So let's identify what those things were. All right. Last tip from the world of brain science. There's only 5 ways, folks, for you to get anything into someone's brain. Their eyes, their ears, their nose, and their mouth. The 5 senses. Of them, visual is the fastest way. 90% of everything your brain does all day, Mark, is not think. Well, in your case, it might be 90%. But for the rest of us, 90% of what we do all day is not thinking, Mark. It's processing visual stimuli. Mark, why is that? Why is it so important for our brain to be paying attention visually to stuff around us?
Because it's trying to keep us alive. It wants to make sure we're not in danger.
It wants to prevent you getting hit in the face with something, right? So it's constantly scanning the environment. What you guys need to understand is that information gets to anyone's brain 30 times faster through their eyes than through their ears. Never say it if you can show it. Now, there's 3 ways, folks, and I have it here on the screen, for you to make any message more visual. This would be the second exercise I would give you to think about. Number 1, take your words and turn them into pictures. It could be a graphic. It could be an icon. Make your words visual. Number 2, take your pictures that you've just created and give them motion, a video, something that builds on the screen, something that you can draw on. But now it has 2 dimensions. Third dimension is the most physical thing. Bring them to the thing itself. Okay, remember, the brain is always assessing the environment. It's looking for stimulus and response. And we can set up certain cues for ourselves. Mark, I have my favorite visual, which is a cue for me and a cue for you that we're at the end of this part of the presentation. Before I talk about this slide, is there anything you would like to share with the group before I close up regarding this visual and why it's so important to me?
I think you do it way better than I can. I do love the visual and the story with it.
Does that mean I'm just? That mean I just that? Well, I don't want to go there. Okay, if I'm slightly better, it's all I need to be. All right, so here's the visual and the statue. The statue I've owned for 20 years. My friend, well, she became my friend. The artist's name is Bobby Carlisle. She calls this self-made man. I think this is the most powerful visual. They themselves are makers of themselves, right? This guy's actually carving himself out of granite. But the interesting thing is the spin that I now put on it, which is entirely different after the last 2 weeks. He's not creating himself, Mark. He's revealing himself to us.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Hugh, your CEO, revealed himself to me as someone who cares deeply about what your people are going through now, and he asked for this. That's not the response that every CEO in the world is having right now. Okay? He revealed himself. But we're seeing it with our neighbors. We're seeing it with our customers. We're seeing it with our family. Whether you win the lottery or whether you go through a tragedy, those kind of events are going to reveal who you are. If you're a jerk and you win the lottery, you now got money to be even more of a jerk. If you're a good person and you win the lottery, you got money now to show people really how good you were. And it's the same thing with this stuff we're going through. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times, but we're going to remember it was what we made of it. Mark, it was my honor to contribute. Thank you very much for allowing me to help you guys focus on connecting your values and your behaviors to your customer experience. It's been my honor to do this, and I'm just glad that you and I are on the planet together. Thank you, buddy.
Thanks, Dean, and I agree with you, and thanks everybody for taking the time to join. Like Dean said, I think this is a time we can all reveal ourselves to families, friends, loved ones, coworkers, customers, etc. And hopefully we've all been able to take a couple of things away from this session that'll let us do that even better. So thanks everybody. Appreciate your time. Have a great rest of your day.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes today's conference call. Thank you for participating. You may now disconnect.